All right, let's talk Leadership Louisville, president since 2012. What led you to that work?
So when I was in college, I discovered that I'm a joiner. You know, I like to participate in the things that bring us all together. And when I left college to come get my first real job, I couldn't figure out how to have that same experience, how to join. I tried to get connected to, like, I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm going to serve on a nonprofit board. And then I looked at all the people who served on nonprofit boards, and they were, you know, senior vice president of this and the managing partner of that, and I was pretty junior. Oh, no, not that, okay. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll get involved with the city. And it's really complicated to figure out how to do that, how to navigate all that. And I just couldn't figure out how to get plugged in to the bigger community once I left the little U of L community. And at that time, Judge Jackson had been running for re-election, and she collected business cards from a bunch of young professionals.
So Rebecca Jackson?
Okay. Yes, Judge Rebecca Jackson. And she assembled a group in her conference room of young professionals, and she wanted to talk about brain drain and how do we keep you here. And so we had this amazing conversation about what it would take to keep young professionals here, and we talked a little bit about civic engagement being a good anchor, a good connection. And so from those conversations, we started the Young Professionals Association of Louisville, which is YPAL, and I was the first chair, founding chair of YPAL. And I just knew that this idea of civic engagement is something that I was passionate about. And so every point in my career has been connected to that and got me one step closer to being the president of Leadership Louisville.
But that's full circle when you come back to that with that connectedness and brain drain and leadership. So it really was kind of serendipity that this all played out the way it did. And even the motto, when you said this for you all, it's a lot about greater good. And that seems to be at your core. So tell me about that motto of your organization.
Yeah. So we talk about the city is what it is because the citizens are who they are. And if we want to live in a great community, then we need great individuals to rise up and contribute their time and talent to serving the whole city, to elevating the greater good. You know, our purpose is to inspire and equip leaders to be better and do better so that they will make those investments in themselves to show up as the best version of themselves, and then use those gifts and talents to create better community, to be the part of the rising tide that lifts all ships.
Now, let's talk about the different programs that you have in place, because you've got Leadership Louisville, Bingham Fellows, Ignite, Focus, and Encore. So all of that, all of those different programs, explain each one just briefly, like so people go, okay, overview, that's where I might fit in.
Yeah. So Leadership Louisville is a 40-year-old organization, and we have counterpart programs in pretty much every city in the country. The difference is Leadership Louisville started as just the flagship, the core program, but then we keep expanding, right? So Leadership Louisville started, and our board of directors said, this is great, but we can only take so many people, and then we created Focus Louisville. Focus is 2.5 days. It's the entree, and it was our opportunity to say, let's bring more people into this conversation. So we run Focus Louisville repeatedly year-round to be able to elevate the numbers of people who will show up and serve. And then, in addition to that, the board then said, a few years after that, well, if we have a short program, we should have a long program that's a deep dive, let's drive change. And that is our Bingham Fellows program. They take one significant civic issue. They are responsible for moving the needle, doing something that impacts change. And then they said, okay, well, now we've got a deep dive program. We should think about brain drain and keeping all our young professionals here. So we added the Ignite program, which is our program for young professionals. And if you have a program for young professionals, you should also have a program for baby boomers as they start to think about retirement, and that is our Encore program.
Ah,
yes.
Okay.
So we do all those. Those are our civic programs, but then we also do a lot of things where people can drop in and spend the day with us through our green room, and that's based on skill building. So just come hang out for the day, and we'll help you sharpen the saw and get things done with and through other people.
If anybody's watching and they think, okay, I want to do that, how do I do that? Is it open to anyone? And how do people get involved?
Yeah, so it's absolutely open to all of us. And we have a lot of great entry level, or entrees into the center that are free and virtual. And they're all on our website. So you can look at our micro-learning courses, which are 1 hour, free and virtual. We have our Thought Leadership series, which is also free and virtual right now. And our calendar of trainings and our application process is all at our leadershiplouisville.org site. So we invite everyone, no matter where they are on their leadership journey, whether they're just wanting to show up as a little bit bigger, better, brighter version of themselves, or whether they're the CEO and titan of industry and they need to be among other leaders.
Are people born leaders? Is there such a thing as a natural leader, or is that something that we learn and just get better and make our mistakes and learn from them? How do you answer that question?
There are certainly people that were bestowed with gifts and talents from birth. But I think leadership is always learned. I mean, Kennedy told us leadership and learning are indispensable to one another. Because the question is not how good are you today? The question is how good do you wish to be? And as fantastic as you are today, as much value as you're bringing to your team today, you're never going to be able to bring more value if you don't invest it back in your own learning journey. So I always think that leaders are not really born, they are self-made. And we do that by being open to feedback, by listening a whole lot.
Take that criticism.
That's right, yeah. Feedback is a gift. Sometimes it's an ugly Christmas sweater that you wish you could take back.
But you have to wear it.
Right.
Let's talk about some of the traits that you see that are a constant in making a good leader. And one that I love the quote that you said, with courage being key.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I often talk a lot about two things, and the first one is courage, the second one is confidence. I actually think confidence is the precursor to that. So when we do a lot of work with leaders, we start with building the confidence building block, right? And confidence is the thing that actually turns inner thoughts into action. And that's pretty critical to leadership, is for you to be able to take those internal thoughts and turn them into action. So we talk about that. But courage is the second piece of the puzzle. Right? It is the piece of the puzzle that is about being willing to stick your neck out there. I think it's particularly important in our civic leaders to take some courageous risks. I think that we get in life what we have the courage to ask for. So if we want great things for ourselves, for our people, and whether that our people means the people within our work organization, or the people within our family, or the people within our community, I kind of think that is the mission critical piece of the puzzle.
I would say in Louisville right now, we're probably, you tell me if you agree with this, I don't want to give any supposition. I think we're at one of the most critical junctures, probably since I've lived here, and that's been about 30 years than we've ever been, about where we go from here after a pandemic, racial inequity issues, all of the above. Would you agree with that? How do you see it?
Yeah, so a lot of our civic leaders are talking about it in terms of it being three pandemics that are happening to us at once, right? One is the COVID. Second is dealing with a long history of racism. And third is economic recovery and building a better economic future for all the people who live in our communities. And the complexity here is, the reason why this is so challenging is because of the complexity of the puzzle. if you had to deal with any one of those things, then you'd go, yep, this is just like last year when we had this other issue that was huge. But because we have all of these things operating at once, it becomes incredibly challenging. And I also think it adds an especially difficult layer because we are better, quicker, faster when we trust one another, right? That is the way that we accelerate the speed of change.
We can galvanize, yeah.
That's right. The fact that we cannot be physically together hampers our ability to build those trust conversations. So for all of those reasons, I would absolutely agree with you, Rachel. Right now is probably one of the most difficult and most pivotal times in our community's history.
So we're navigating new waters because we've never been through a pandemic before. They were 100 years ago, but we've never experienced that. Yeah. Racial inequity has been around always, perhaps not brought to the forefront. And I think in part that was a part of because of the pandemic, because all eyes were on it. There was no turning away. So then what do you say to people as being a leader in our community? How do you tackle this when it's something we haven't navigated before? What's the first thing that you would say to a leader if they were to call you and say, Cynthia, this is a new one for us? What do we do?
So I'm going to go back to this idea of trust being our most valuable asset right now because it accelerates the speed at which we can do things, but it also requires us to be honest, and I think that's what people want right now. So my advice to all of our leaders is to lead with the honesty, to lead with that authenticity, to talk about, to paint the picture of the world as it is, not as we wish it would be. And I think people are waiting for that validation, right? They are, whether this is in our organizations or in our community, they want us to acknowledge the problem.
Validation.
That's right.
I mean, until we do that, and we always say you can't have reconciliation without the truth. So when we talk about all leaders, and this is just in general with leadership, then is that admitting mistakes, facing the music, listening to I mean, which one comes first? All of the above, right?
Yeah, all of the above.
Because I do think we talked before we got started with this about, I mean, 2020, 2021, I do think that is the year, as we have said, authenticity.
Yeah.
People get that others are fallible, right? We all make mistakes. They're all, but I think it's admitting that and what did we learn from it and how we're going to change because of it, maybe.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I do think this needs to be the year of authenticity for us. And as you said, part of that is admitting mistakes. When we do that, we actually put people on our side, right? They want to help us then. When we say, hey, here's what I think we got wrong, and then we invite people to be part of the problem solving, generally speaking, people want to help. So when you start out that way, you kind of diffuse the, defensiveness only elevates the situation. When we actually admit, these are the things that I think we screwed up on, these are the things that I'd wish I'd done differently, it invites more conversation, and we need that. We need the honest conversation. We also need action, though. So this is part of the next part, too, is we have to start with the authenticity to say, this is the truth, the way, this is all the good, bad, and the ugly. But that second piece that we talked about a minute ago, which is the courage to do something, that's what follows it. And then I think you have room for optimism.
So the courage to follow up.
Yeah.
And we are not saying by any means leadership is easy. I mean, I've looked at things that have happened in this town and the criticism that comes from it, and I know you take that on in public service. But with social media and everything, I mean, it is a skewering 24 hours a day, no matter what you do. So I think somewhere in there has to be that lens, right? That we recognize these are public servants, and I mean, social media, it can just be awful at times.
Yeah, so we always talk about if you're currently experiencing a problem, then you are probably at least 50% responsible for that problem. So you have to take on an ownership share. But then there's also the other piece that says, but you can't shoulder the entire weight of that problem on your shoulders. So the first thing is, what are the things that that you need to own? And then the second thing is, we need everybody else to cut our public servants a little bit of a break, right? It's incredibly difficult to be a public servant. And one of the things that I would recommend to everyone is to spend a little bit of time working on a civic board, working in government, so that you understand how complex it is, how many things it's stick your finger in this hole here and it creates another one here. It's a domino effect. So making sure that that we're supporting all those people that have volunteered their time and energy and talent, is important.
We talked about a leader, and I said, the traits. You said it would be a composite. If I said, pick one leader. Authenticity is big right now. It may not have been 30 years ago when we had different demands that we were asking of leaders. I don't know. Authentic, to me, is always a good thing. But if you did a composite, what would be some of those traits that you would take that if you could roll it up in one, say, that's a good leader?
Yeah. So authenticity is a great place to start, and I think it's interesting to talk about authenticity as a newer skill that people are looking for, because previously people would have been looking for someone who has, the polish and the stiff, right? I'm going to present the Pollyanna positive, and that's not helpful for us. I think it's also interesting, we do a lot of work with women in leadership, and one of the studies that we found actually polled, what are we looking for in our 21st century leaders? And authenticity is one of the things that we're looking for. We're looking for empathy, we're looking for creativity. These are part of the things that make us, what we're looking for in our 21st century leaders.
And I think empathy is every bit, to me, as important as the authenticity. And we've talked about that because I want a leader who's going to show some emotion. I do. That tells me they care. That's at the core of who they are. I don't want a stiff person who's, going to be robotic and not show any emotion. Now that's me.
Yeah.
What have you found most people want?
That's exactly true. And it's, for me, it was particularly interesting because we're doing this work around find your voice, and it's particularly women really struggle with this. They want help trying to figure out how to find their voice. And one of the things that they have asked is, I need help controlling my emotion at work, like I am getting feedback that is, I'm too emotional. And
I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Because I'm an emotional person.
So here is the interesting thing, I think, is that I think that feedback almost always comes from men. And our workplaces are generally created by, decades and decades and centuries, really, of male-dominated workforce. We teach men from the time that they're tiny that crying is not an acceptable thing, that emotions are not an acceptable thing. So it shouldn't really be a surprise to any of us that the traditional thinking is that emotions in the workplace are not acceptable. But these studies that are coming out are telling us that people want emotion in the workplace. So what we've decided is that rather than teaching women how not to cry in the workplace, we need to actually work with men on how to bring their full range of emotion into the workplace.
That's a completely change of dynamic.
Right. Yeah, but it's what people want.
Right.
And I think that Uh, people are wanting to work for people, right? They don't want to work for a robot. They want to work as part of a tribe where they can identify with the people that they're working with and around.
Well, and as a working mom, especially after I had children, I mean, it was very different then than when I saw women become bosses who were mothers, and how, boy, did things change as far as, oh, there may be a place for us to nurse. There may be a place for, let's talk about daycare. Let's make sure you stay in the workforce. It really has changed the dynamic with more women in places of power and leadership.
It has, and that's one of the things when you look at, like, so why are we talking about diversity? Why do we have to talk more about diversity? And so a lot of times I have flipped the conversation from talking about diversity because it is the right thing to do. It is, but I have flipped the conversation to helping people understand that diversity at all of our tables is also the most profitable thing to do. Companies win, organizations benefit when they are more diverse. All of the data tells us that.
Do you think real change is coming with that?
Yeah, okay. So first, I think companies are willing to listen because the numbers are supporting that. They're saying, they're looking at it going, oh, well, so diversity and inclusion does actually drive economic bounty for my company. A piece of that is because our demographics are shifting. So you can't look at our demographics and not understand 2 + 2 = 4, right? Our population data tells us that we are becoming more diverse. So you kind of have to pay attention to that. If you weren't paying attention to that before, then I do think the work that was done in this community in particular, and in communities across the country this summer with the folks that were out there protesting, is good work. It drew attention to things that needed to have attention drawn to them. And we suffer from a long Southern heritage of politeness. And people are unwilling to have uncomfortable conversations. And so the work that was done this summer to make people talk about uncomfortable things is making people talk about uncomfortable things. And we cannot fix what we won't talk about.
And that's where change comes, from being uncomfortable. I mean, everybody feels that and says that. So you're good with pushing the envelope. You think it has to happen to make us better.
I am, I do. In fact, I lead all of our, when you sign up for one of our civic programs, one of the things that we talk about initially is get comfortable being uncomfortable. For a couple reasons. One is, as an adult, you have your brain is no longer quite as spongy as it used to be. So you are only learning if you are on the edge of your comfort zone. So I tell people, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because if you're signed up for one of our programs, I want you to come out transformed. I want you to come out different. And in order for that to happen, you have to be pushed. You have to think about things differently. So, so we do it for that reason. But we also do it because there are things that need to be changed in our community, and we can't afford to simply have polite conversation anymore. So I'm absolutely an advocate of difficult conversations.
I'm seeing some new faces on council, some diversity on council, some younger voices on council, and they will push the envelope.
Yeah.
There are going to be conversations that will be had now that perhaps haven't. You think that's a good thing as well?
I do. So here's I said earlier that I think we all need to offer up a little bit of grace for our public servants because it's a difficult job. And I think that's true. I also think anyone who is in public service should have a thick skin. And it should be okay for us to talk about all the things that we've screwed up, that we've done wrong, that we wish were differently, or were different. And some of these younger, new voices that are coming in, they're willing to do that. I do hope they will afford people grace for their intent, not for their impact. And we talk a lot about this. There's kind of a distinction there, and it's difficult. I know sometimes people have lost patience. They've said, you know what? I am tired of waiting for you to have this conversation in a nice way. I get that. I understand why. And I still hope that we can learn to argue better. I want us to argue, but I want us to do it in a way, this is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, my favorite, right? Is fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that makes others want to join you. So I hope we get this balance of these young people who are coming in who will say, this needs to change. And I hope they're influenced a little bit by the wisdom of some of the senior statesmen that say, but we need to afford people grace.